Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we are returning to War in the Pacific, Admirals Edition, our Let's Play series against Evoken. It is June 7th, 1942, and we have a turn where we've sent some cruisers down toward Meen, which is a major oil-producing facility off the eastern coast of Sumatra, and they have engaged a Japanese task force right off the bat. I had hoped to sneak these cruisers in to bombard Meen itself, because it is a major oil production facility, but it seems like they have run into a task force, and it appears to be an anti-submarine task force here. They've got 1 destroyer and 3 patrol boats by the looks of it, so these are the guys who sank that submarine of ours not that long ago. So while maybe we are not hitting tankers, which would certainly be the ideal, perhaps we're getting some revenge for the submarine that they sank. Of course, anytime there's a Japanese destroyer in the mix, you do worry about long lance torpedoes. It is a nighttime engagement, which usually considerably favors the Japanese, especially from their destroyer's point of view. So hopefully we get some hits on there without any submarine or any torpedoes hitting our shipping, because, you know, if we take any serious damage, these guys could be sitting ducks for Japanese air attacks that may counter them. Does look like we're coming in real close into 2,000 yards. I don't know anything about the Yamagi destroyer here that we're shooting at. I think it's an older one if I remember, but looks like we got a nice 8-inch shell hit into her. We already sank one of the patrol boats, so things getting into an early start. We've got our 6-inch Glasgow light cruiser firing. We've got the USS New Orleans, which is an 8-inch treaty gun cruiser, and we've got the light cruiser Hobart. I believe those are 2 British cruisers and then 1 American cruiser. Looks like we did take a shell hit on the Glasgow. Didn't seem to do much damage. Meanwhile, we are racking the Japanese destroyer here as this engagement comes on. Several hits here. It looks like the Japanese, I believe that was just an order for them to withdraw from the commander of their fleet. The range is increasing. I can't imagine patrol boats would outrun cruisers, although obviously the destroyer potentially could. That being said, she sank after a couple massive explosions and big hits, and now we're putting 8-inch shells into these patrol boats, which won't last long under this rain of fire. So good news here. It looks like we are going to have a pretty clean victory. I don't see any of my ships burning. I don't see any smoke. So it looks like we're going to have a pretty clean victory against a Japanese task force here. Maybe even wipe the whole task force out. Again, I don't know if the patrol boats can get out of the way, but 3 of the 4 ships are sunk now as the New Orleans turns her sights on the final patrol boat, and there she goes. She sinks. So we just took 1 shell hit to the light cruiser Glasgow. No fires or any indications of serious damage. We put 7 shells into the Yamagi, and it is sunk. We put 5 shells into the Banshu Maru, and it is sunk. 8 shells into the Higashima Maru, and it is sunk. And 2 shells into the Kaka Maru, and it is sunk. So we just stack wiped a Japanese ASW task force. The 3 patrol boats, meh. But the destroyer, anytime you sink a destroyer, Japan does not have enough destroyers, not even close. So wiping out a Japanese ASW task force and a destroyer to boot, that's a pretty substantial victory. Probably our biggest victory in like a month in this game. So again, nothing that's going to turn the tide of the war by itself, but the Pacific War in many ways is a war of attrition, and so that's, you know, what we're looking at here. Meanwhile, our cruisers did continue on to try to bombard the port of Meen and the oil-producing facilities here. I don't know if there's anything in the port. Oh, I just saw something about a tanker. So maybe there are some ships in the port here. It looks like most of the shells are being fired at the land. You can see here a pretty rapid conclusion here. It looks like another... Okay, let's see here. So our cruisers came in. They had already expended a considerable amount of their ammunition in the bombardment, or the surface engagement, but they did come in and put a shell into 2 separate tankers, which were in the harbor of Meen. Would have been nice for them to focus all of their energy on the tankers rather than the harbor. They did some damage to the non-combatants, the engineers ashore there. They also did some damage, 1 hit to the refinery, so that'll damage the refinery by 1. 3 manpower hits, 399 fires, which I think the fires can spread in subsequent turns and do more damage. I don't know if 399 is a lot. I don't think it is, but it's something. 3 airbase hits, 5 airbase supply hits, so at least some of the supply that's already there, some supplies destroyed. 20 runway hits, probably enough to put the runway out of action for a day or so, maybe. I really don't know. 4 port hits, 1 port fuel hit, so destroy some fuel in harbor, which is, anytime you destroy fuel for Japan, they already don't have enough, so that's good. And then 2 port supply hits, same sort of story above. So not the most decisive bombardment, but we at least did nominal damage to 2 tankers. Maybe they'll start on fire, I don't know. But at least something to put them out of action probably for at least a couple of days while they patch up those holes. And then some damage to the port there. But still, I'd consider that a pretty big victory to have wiped out that ASW task force. And now it's time for those guys to haul ass out of there before the Japanese air power shows up. We'll see if that happens later in the turn or not. Meanwhile, our destroyer bombarded a Fate. No sign of any ground. Well, they do have some ground troops there. You can see there were some casualties inflicted on some non-combatants. I didn't see what they were bombarding. We'll have to take a look and see if we have any intel on that. We're also bombarding at Nomaya. It doesn't say that they're shooting at anything, so maybe Nomaya is unoccupied. Oh, no, they've got an SNLF unit there we're bombarding there, so we know they have at least 1 ground unit there. The main reason to send these destroyers out was to try and get better intel on what the Japanese might have in some of these southern Pacific possessions. If we were looking at possibly doing a counterattack, how serious does the invasion need to be planned? Is this, a huge effort with huge bombardment support, or can we put a regiment ashore and they'll overwhelm a small token force the Japanese have left to hold the position? We don't know the answer to that, but that's what some of these naval bombardments in the South Pacific have been over the last few days, is an effort to get more intelligence on what the Japanese might have there. Meanwhile, it looks like the Japanese are bombing our troops at Clark Field. Again, as to be expected, those boys have basically no supply left. That bombing raid didn't really do any damage. Another raid, likewise, did very little damage. And some aircraft over Rangoon. Our B-17s are also bombing a Fate. I don't even know if the Japanese have any troops at a Fate. They have a naval construction battalion there because they were bombing that through heavy cloud cover. No losses, but at least told us there's a naval construction unit there. Cliche, thank you very much for the resub. Appreciate the support. Okay. So, alright, so no AM air operations. I don't even know if they spotted my cruisers on the way out. So hopefully those cruisers get out of there okay. As long as we don't lose those cruisers, I think that's a very successful mission. I mean, again, not decisive, but again, the other benefit of that is it's going to make him think twice. He's been using his naval bombers to hammer some of the troops that we have, the Australian troops that we have astride the supply line between India. Something else just sank, too. We just got a sound of a ship sinking. But hopefully, that attack, 1, it'll, do a little bit of damage, but 2, it should also give him some pause and make him think about how he has his air units set up. If he's going to keep trying to bomb those Australian troops to the west of Sumatra on that tiny little island, we know he's got Nels or Bettys out of Palembang, but he obviously didn't have them set to naval attack, or they didn't spot us in time. So if that's the case, maybe it'll, limit his bombing attacks in the region and force him to commit more troops to, or more aircraft to, sort of patrolling and attacking potential threats rather than actually bombing our existing troops. Auckland expands the port to 8. That's a nice sized port in New Zealand now. Okay, so we'll take a look at things here in a moment. Like I said, I've already sent the turn, so this is more about just sort of showing how things are and what we've decided to do, and also the status of our cruisers that went in there on the naval invasion, or naval attack, as we try to get them out of there. I would assume he will shift naval aviation to try to catch our cruisers on the way out. We'll have to see how far they made it out, because they didn't get bombed today, so that's good news. Okay, so let's take a look at the cruisers first. They made it all the way back to Great Nicobar, so they are already basically out of torpedo range from Singapore. They're 18 from Singapore. We know he's got Nels and Bettys at Palembang. They're 25 out of range from that, so they've already made it out of range. They were as close as 10 when they hit Meen. So if the enemy had hit these guys at Meen in daylight with torpedo bombers, they could have destroyed those cruisers. Even if they had gotten them, I'm selecting the wrong. I was selecting the wrong hex. But even so, at 15, Meen is just barely inside torpedo range. They could have gotten him a couple of places in the Strait of Malacca on the way out. I think they got out before sunlight came out anyway. And especially if he had naval bombers at Singapore, Meen is easily within torpedo range. Great Nicobar might be on the fringe of torpedo range at 18. So we'll have to see about getting them out of there. I'd have to double check. If we go to wrong screen. If we go to the aviation here and we set, what are the Nels? Because I think we've seen them use Nels. They're the first version, right? The 2M. So the 2M can carry torpedoes out to 15 hexes, which, like, theoretically, if you're at Singapore and you hit Great Nicobar, that's 18. So they can bomb them from there. But they could also, I don't know if they have torpedoes. Remember, you got to have certain types of units with torpedoes assigned. But, like, in theory, you know, Victoria Point, it's got a airfield large enough, a level 4 airfield. Now, I don't know if he has a headquarters unit here with torpedoes, but Great Nicobar could easily be in range of that. Tavoy is another nice field, about 14 away. Bombay is a decent field. It's 15 away. So Great Nicobar is in the sights, potentially, of Japanese counterattacks if he moves bombers around to hit them. And that's my hope, right? He's been using bombers out of Palembang to hit Coast Island with bombs with the troops we have there, the small amount of aviation support we have there. We sort of put these guys in as a blocking force to secure the supply lines between Australia and India. But if he took Coast or Christmas Island, he could threaten that with bombers if he built up a field there. Now, he has just been content to bomb these guys largely uncontested out of Palembang. The hope is that by knocking out that ASW task force near Meen, he will think, all right, I got to put some aviation into Meen, which we hit with bombs. I've got to put some 53 fires, by the way, still. So those fires could spread. They could do more damage. It does look like we only did 1 damage to the oil in the refinery, but who knows? Those fires could spread and do a little bit more damage to the base. That's kind of industrial bases can be hit with firestorms, essentially, in that they can do additional damage in the turns beyond. I think it's more likely he moves bombers into Singapore, where he probably has resources. I kind of doubt he's got aviation resources sitting around at Victoria Point or at Tavoy at the moment, based on what we've seen. So what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to get out of there as quick as I can. I've set up 2 task forces, a light cruiser task force with all the cruisers that we had at Great Nicobar. They didn't all go forward for the bombardment. Would have been nice to have those additional CLs, the Boise and the Phoenix, take part, but they weren't there in time, so they did not participate. So these boys are going to basically go directly west first out to about here. I believe they'll get here by the time the sun comes up. 9 hexes, which puts them out of torpedo range of Victoria Point, puts them out of torpedo range of Tavoy, probably puts them out of bomber range realistically, unless he wants to send unescorted fighters out that way. Sabang is in range, but Sabang is only a 1, and I don't think there's any reason to believe he's got aviation support there. He could send an unescorted, he could send bombers out with bombs from there. I highly doubt he's got torpedoes. And frankly, if he's just sending bombers out with bombs, I doubt he can cram like 100 in there. If he sends like 40 bombers with bombs, maybe he does some real damage on a cruiser. Probably doesn't sink it though. So we'll see. But I don't think that's a major risk. The other alternative is, other than stationing more aircraft further north to close down the Strait of Malacca, one thing this could cause him to do, one thing we need to keep in mind, maybe he will say, hey, you know what? I don't want to deal with cruisers coming down here. I'm going to do a carrier raid on Colombo or something. That is a very real possibility. We have not seen his carriers anytime recently. He could say, listen, I need to try and close down his naval operations in the Bay of Bengal. He knows a fair bit about the aviation we have in Burma. He's probably not going to risk his carriers by moving toward Rangoon directly. But what he could do, again, based on what he knows, is he could try and launch a carrier raid on Colombo and see if he can hit some ships in port there. So that's something we got to consider. We don't have a ton of ships here right now, but that's somewhat changed. Also, the cruisers are going to be falling back in that direction. So I don't think he does a carrier raid all the way up to Bombay. That would seem absolutely rash. But attacking Sri Lanka, certainly something he could do with a carrier raid as a result of this. So maybe, it would be good to get more intel on where his carriers are at. That would be nice. We have very little current information about where his carriers are at. So that would be nice. We're continuing to unload supplies at Rangoon here. It looks like we've got about 90,000. We've got several task forces here. Some of them are withdrawing now that they've unloaded their fuel. This task force has about 7,000 left. If we take a look, I don't think any of my subs... I thought I saw someone where it said they might have had temporary flotation failing. Maybe it was Dolphin here, kind of trying to come out of here to Colombo, a little bit crippled. I don't know if we have anybody else out this way. 020's fine. I'm not sure. We've got 2 damaged subs here, Salmon and Spearfish on their way out. I'm not sure if there's anybody else that's more badly hurt. Stingray is crippled also on its way to Colombo, 46 flood. That's kind of serious. And then we do have 1 sub which made it to Rangoon here, 42 flood, the Seawolf, which is trying to retreat back toward Calcutta because there are some shipyards on Calcutta. I don't think it's likely he would bomb Calcutta with his carriers. That would require him to just get in too close, sandwiched between major land bases with air aviation. And we have a lot of air at Calcutta. And he set some of that up when he was helping us with logistics a month ago. We've got a lot of aircraft here. They're not great crews, but there is a quality in quantity, so we got 70 Wildcats just in 1 squadron here. That would be a lot of aviation. He'd probably wreck it. He'd probably do a lot of damage to that aviation, but the question is, does he want to lose 40 or 50 crack pilots, which is certainly what could happen, in that particular attack. One other thing, did we check the cruisers? Because we did see, what was it, Glasgow? Or I think it was Glasgow took a shell hit. So a little bit of engine damage, but they're all still capable of making 30-plus knots. I'm ordering these guys to move at full speed toward Karachi. They probably don't need to go to Karachi. But I'll redirect them after the next turn because they don't have enough fuel to make it all the way to Karachi on full speed. But they should have enough fuel to make it to Colombo on full speed. So we'll do that. The other thing I also have happening here is these guys are going directly west. So if they get here, they are 13 from Sabang. So if he does put bombers in Sabang, they'll be closer. But we also have destroyers that are pulling out, and they're going directly to Colombo. These guys are going to be a little bit further east, so they may pick up the enemy aviation if they do strike at them. We'll see. One other update is we've got Prince of Wales, which is on its way to England. It is at 13 days out, and we haven't seen its flotation tick up, and it is moving at full speed. So remember, when we were moving at mission speed, it was like 50 days not that long ago. We're under 40 days if we have to slow back down, but we are moving at flank speed. So we're only about 2 weeks out from getting her into the best dockyards available to the British in the United Kingdom. So hopefully that helps us speed her back to repair. Meanwhile, interesting, despite the fact that the cruisers bombarded and did spot some enemy ground units here at Nomaya and at Fate, these other places, there's no actual intel of showing any ground units on these bases, which I don't know why, because we just saw that there were things. So not sure about that. Also, if we take a look at the ships we sank, I know I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit. Last turn, these are the ships we sank. The Yomagi, which is a Momai class destroyer. I think that's got to be like their oldest version of destroyers here because it's only worth 3 victory points. So it must have been kind of a second line destroyer. Still, Japan doesn't have a ton of destroyers, so sinking that is still valuable. We also sank 2 good Japanese patrol boats. For a patrol boat to be worth 3 victory points, definitely a nicer and newer class of ASW type vessel. And so the fact that we sank them, good news. That helps our submarine task forces, although they've got plenty of PBs. And then a very basic 1 victory point level Tosu patrol boat class, which is, obviously not as good, not very valuable. All told, though, 10 victory points for the cost of no losses for our cruisers getting out of there. So that's good news. I didn't see any reports of any of our ships sinking. We did hear the one gurgling noise, so something may have sunk, or maybe this is one of the remaining damaged ships sort of sinking after the fact. Not sure. But yeah. Was there anything else here? If we scroll all the way back up, anything else recently? Oh yeah, the tuna. So we were avenging the tuna, which was also, ironically enough, worth 10 victory points. So we sank the ASW task force. That might have been the ASW task force that sank the tuna. So I guess that's good news, I suppose. So biggest victory in quite a while. I think it's worth 3 victory points finished because Japan doesn't have a lot of destroyers. That's the problem. Like, it's old, but every destroyer is worth something when you only have a handful. Like, what's Japan's total destroyer count in the entire war? Like 100 something? They can't afford to lose a single destroyer, really. So, in any event. Okay, so that's the main thing. We did see that there was a level 8 port added to Auckland, I believe it was. So now this port can handle up to 128,000 tons of shipping. 72,000 tons, I believe, is the largest ship that can dock, and then 128,000 tons total, I believe, or maybe it's 72,000 very efficiently and 128 when you include the roadstead. Either way, very nice port here. Very good news if we ever need to do anything in New Zealand. I don't know that we do, but it is what it is. We're also in the process of picking the 32nd Infantry Division up out of Suva and relocating them to Australia. I'm going to get a couple of divisions into Australia. I need to find out more about Nomaya. We had destroyers bombard there. Didn't seem there was a lot in defense. Didn't see a lot of coastal guns fire at us. So it does make me tempted. Like, I don't know that launching a campaign against New Caledonia while the Japanese carrier fleet is still intact is entirely logical, but we have the American Division planning for a landing on Nomaya. If Nomaya is lightly held, I'd be really tempted to drop them in there, because even though the Japanese carrier would pose a problem in this region, I wonder if it wouldn't benefit us if they tried to stop us, right? Like, Japanese carriers operating this far south would be such a logistical problem for Japan to try and support, while we would be very close to our supply lines and reinforcements. And so we could just wait for the carriers to move away, and then we could bring additional troops in or additional reserves in. And if they don't have much, we might just take it on day one. So, you know. Yeah, silly. We never had Force Z or whatever destroyed up here. Our Prince of Wales and Repulse kind of stayed down here on the December 7th turn, and then the Japanese launched an invasion on Mersing a couple of days later, maybe a week later. We sent the Prince of Wales and the Repulse up against Mersing. The Japanese didn't do a good job of taking out the Air Force at Singapore, and so we had air cover for our ships. There was a night naval battle near Mersing where we sank a couple of Japanese destroyers, and our own Repulse and Prince of Wales were both badly damaged by long lance torpedoes. They both did manage to limp back to Singapore, and then under a lot of friendly cover limp further south out to Oosthaven, and then they were able to escape to South Africa. So actually both the Prince of Wales and the Repulse survived in our particular engagement with the enemy. We sank the Haruna as well in that Mersing operation. Wildebeest biplanes came in and put in several torpedoes on Japanese shipping there. The American heavy cruiser Houston charged north with some additional cruisers after our battleships had to withdraw due to long lance deaths or damage. The Houston and a couple of other destroyers moved north and finished off the Haruna, which had already been crippled by torpedoes. So she was already pretty much out of the fight, but we finished her off with cruisers. We did lose the Houston for what it's worth. But yeah, so 122 destroyers is not very many finished, especially when you consider, if we take a look here, they have already lost... Well, again, there's fog of war. But according to this, Japan has already lost quite a few destroyers. Now, some of these I don't think were lost. Like the Unknowns, pretty sure those were not lost. But I do know that we sank a couple at Mersing. I believe these three here were sunk by the battleships near Mersing. We just sank one near Meen. The Batavia ones, I believe, were actually sunk. I mean, really anything that's like more than 60 days. So really anything before like the February date here, I believe all of these below here were actually lost. I know we sank a one or two near Mersing. And then I think we sank a couple near New Caledonia. So like they only have 122 destroyers. They don't have a lot to spare. And so, you know, if they lose 20 garbage destroyers, that's just more work for the good ones to have to take up too, right? But I don't think the Victoria Point one was sunk. So this Yagumo I don't think was actually sunk. But anyway. So yeah, a lot of DDs sunk. Not as many cruisers, although we did sink. So you can see we lost the Houston, the Java, and then we also lost the Dragon, Ceres, and the Raleigh. But the Japanese have lost the Tenru at Tarawa. We launched a carrier strike at Tarawa, and we sank the Tenru with carrier bombs. And then we also sank the Katori near Mersing, in December, yeah, during the Battle of Mersing with those heavy cruisers and battleships of ours. And then we also sank the Kashima near Bilap Islands. I believe this was we tried to stop the invasion of New Caledonia with cruisers of our own, and we sank the Kashima, I believe it was, in that area. So we have done some damage to the Japanese forces. Hey, Big Bang, thanks for the resub. Appreciate the support. So with that being said, so what else for this turn? That was kind of the big thing this turn. I have started forming up some shipping to send some reinforcements. So we've got a couple of engineer battalions at Johnson Island, which is going to have to withdraw the Johnson Island base force. So I'm loading up the 175th USAAF base force and going to put them at Johnson Island. I'm also loading up the 176th USAAF base force and sending these guys to Palmyra because we've got some forces here that are about to withdraw. So the Palmyra base force, actually I believe it's the Palmyra CPNAB is going to withdraw here in 23 days. So they'll be removed from the map. And then the Johnson USN CPNAB will be withdrawing in 23 days. And so we're going to put 2 new engineer forces in both of those locations. Apparently also the guys who are building at Penryn Island, which is sort of a key base along our strategic line of communications to Australia here, the 19th Combat Engineer Regiment is also going to be withdrawing, which kind of sucks. Combat engineer units are pretty kick-ass. But we're going to be putting a new one in there into Penryn as well. And then I also need to probably put another engineer unit into Christmas Island, although we do have multiple ones there. We've got a port service unit there. Might make more sense to move these guys somewhere else. Naval support's kind of valuable. At one point, Christmas Island was important in our defensive chain when the Japanese took Canton and Baker. We've since retaken Baker, and Canton might be something we retake somewhat soon. So, yeah, we've even got a Canadian brigade forward deployed with militia at Christmas Island, because at one point it felt like maybe the Japanese were going to push against Palmyra, Fanning, Washington, and Christmas. And if they had done that, that would have seriously imperiled our supply line with Australia. Likewise, why we built up Penryn, and why we've built up Savi and the Fiji Island chain here. We've pushed forward a little bit north. We've taken Vadavupu. We have, positions here at Savi and Suva. And I'm debating a counterattack into New Hebrides and New Caledonia soon. Based on the limited resistance and the limited amount of counter battery fire that hit us when our troops moved, when our destroyers bombarded Nomaya, Comac, Efate, I don't think he's got more than a regiment or 2 on New Caledonia. I could be wrong, obviously. And I don't think he's got really much of anything at Efate and Tania. He might at Espiritu Santos up at Luganville, but I don't know. And so I'm tempted to land a force at Tana. If we take Tana easily, that can support landings at Nomaya and Efate. If we, it's a little bit more exposed here, but if we can get like an aviation unit with some fighters can easily cover Efate. Bombers at Tana can easily hit Nomaya. And the air capacity at Tana can be built up to a level 5. So it could feel a little bit like a Guadalcanal type operation. The Japanese certainly could drive south from Espiritos. It's close enough that it's even a easier support. Rabaul was like at the edge of the string to support against Guadalcanal. Espiritu Santos wouldn't, but it is still way south. And frankly, if we have Varupu and we take Funafuti, then it would be very dicey for the Japanese to try and keep Espiritu Santos as a major base, because their supply lines, surface task forces could sail in here, small surface task forces like destroyers that are not easily spotted by aviation, could definitely threaten any kind of major effort to resupply down here. I wonder if he'd just give this area up. Yes, it is worth a lot of victory points, 300 at Nomaya, and a lot less at Comac. But Nomaya is worth a lot. And, maybe he wouldn't want to do that. Espiritu Santos is also worth a lot. Maybe he wouldn't want to give this up without a major fight. I don't know. But I think that would be a good plan, especially because with these bases, in theory, he can really put a pinch on our supply line. Like, he could bomb northern New Zealand, in theory, if he wanted to, at extreme range. I don't think he would do that. I think that's way too much resources to push that far south. That's a lot of fuel just to get supplies this far south. But it is certainly possible. We have sunk the Haruna, and I don't know what we've lost. I don't think we haven't lost a single battleship, not even at Pearl Harbor. We got a lot of ships that are damaged. We've got a lot of battleships that are still being repaired from Pearl. But not currently. I know I'm taking California and Tennessee out of the dockyards at Pearl, and we're going to send them back to the West Coast to be repaired. And then we also have a couple other battleships here being repaired. We've got Pennsylvania, which will be back in a little bit over 2 months. And then we have one at Mare Island. We've got the West Virginia, which will be ready in 15 days at Mare Island. I think we got one other somewhere around here. Not sure where. San Diego? Oh, we already did that. Not sure, but I think we got one other. Our first CVE, by the way, also just became available, so I haven't decided what to do with it yet. But we've got the Long Island, which is a cruiser or a escort carrier of the Long Island class. It can carry up to 16 aircraft in aviation, so you could throw like a fighter squadron on there to provide air cover for a convoy or something. Or we could use it to transport aviation more efficiently across the Pacific. So, yeah, so that's where we are right now. This is a major logistical turn, so I have pushed a lot of task forces sort of off the map. I'm in the process of, I'm sending the Enterprise back to Pearl, so we're going to send it on a flank speed off map. No escort needed for that to the Panama Canal, and then we'll probably move it up to the West Coast and then move it over to Pearl to link back up with the Hornet, which is also operating out that way. I have also ordered the American carriers out of Bombay. They had been sitting in Bombay for quite some time, kind of doing not a whole lot, and so I am ordering. We've still got the British carriers here, but I'm ordering Yorktown to South Africa. We have the Lexington and Saratoga currently undergoing refit in South Africa. They are going to be locked up for the next 3 weeks doing these refits, unfortunately. But once those are ready, we will send them to the West Coast. And I believe WASP is supposed to arrive soon on the West Coast. Yep, in 2 days. WASP will arrive at Balboa, which is here? Yeah, at the other end of the Panama Canal. So because we're going to have the WASP, because we've already got the Hornet, we're sending the Enterprise and the Yorktown out that way, we will have 4 fleet carriers. 3 weeks after that, we will have 2 more, so we'll have 6 fleet carriers. And, I as much as I think things are going to shape up so that the main action is going to be in the Bay of Bengal, because he's got to take Burma. He hasn't. He's way behind in Burma. He's got to take Burma. I think he's going to mount a major push here, and it may involve naval assets to try and shut down our attempt to resupply through Rangoon, which so far has been very effective. He can't afford to leave Burma because our bombers can hit too many oil targets if he doesn't, once we get the B-24 in larger numbers, and especially the B-29. So I think he's got to make a major push in Burma, but I don't see my carriers as having a major role there, right? Like if we stick him here, I mean, maybe we get a little bit of aviation over the top of this. Maybe there's a little bit of help there, but it just seems like a really high risk for us to deploy carriers there. And I don't see much benefit to it. We've already got a lot of aviation that we've brought in from the States here, so you can see a lot of American fighters are already based in India, which we can forward deploy them. Over 200 aircraft already deployed here. They're training right now. They're trying to get crews ready for an eventual campaign. But, and that's just Calcutta. We've got, a bunch of British aircraft. We've got some American aircraft down here at Chittagong, about 130. We've got another 277 aircraft at Calcutta. So if he does deploy his carriers in the Bay of Bengal, I don't think we need I think the U.S. carrier aviation just has major risk. But maybe for that reason, he won't deploy the Japanese carriers there either, in which case, for the same reason, I think we need to redeploy our carriers back toward either Hawaii, maybe Australia. I'm kind of going the wrong way if that's where we want them deployed, or down near Fiji. It might make more sense to just sail south. But it's less risky to do it over the off map. So anyway, so that's the situation. Again, lots of logistics and stuff going on here this turn, off map largely. You can see we're filling up another task force here in the Middle East with fuel bringing to India. India has a lot of fuel to fuel the economy. Fuel to fuel the economy. Over 1 million fuel sitting at Karachi, so our naval ships can use that, but also over 800,000 supply. Again, all the fuel you pump into here, light industry converts fuel to supply. So that's sort of, fuel is used by ships, but then it is also converted to supply by certain industrial factories. India, I believe, can produce all of the supply it needs through its industry here. You can see 500 light industry in Calcutta. I'm assuming Bombay has a pretty good amount of light industry as well. 240, 260 heavy industry. Heavy industry converts fuel as well. I need to go back and look at the chart if it needs oil to fully operate efficiently. You've got, a much smaller amount at Karachi, but should convert all the fuel, all the supply we need locally if you just pump it full of fuel. Plus, we've got a fair bit of aviation. We got the British carriers at Bombay too. Hermes arrived also, for what it's worth. So you've got Illustrious. What else? Is Hermes here? Illustrious, Indomitable, some armored cruisers. I should probably move the U.S. armored cruisers. I should probably move the U.S. heavy cruisers back to Pearl too. Although it might make sense to give the British a little bit more help. And then we've also got a British task force somewhere here with the Formidable and the Hermes. So the British have 3 heavy carriers and a light. There's the Repulse, who's been fully repaired from her damage. And then also the Atlanta. We've given them the Atlanta to provide some extra flak support. So kind of a mixed task force there. And we continue to pour supply into Rangoon. We've got 2,000 more on the way in these AKLs. We've got another 6,000 coming down from here. We've got, I think, 18,000 or so coming in on this task force to the west of AKLs. I suppose the other risk of us deploying our cruisers to bomb Meen is if he does pump a bunch of naval bombers into Bangkok. I mean, they could hit with torpedoes. They can close. It's going to be a little bit longer range, but they can definitely hit these task forces as they approach Rangoon. You very quickly turn into a Malta situation with very heavy attacks against these boys. One more thing, just sort of touching base on our troops in the Philippines. They're about to starve out. Almost everybody's out of supply here. No one has more than 40 supply. These guys are fairly dispersed. They've still got some effective combat units, but if the Japanese attack them, I think they would pretty quickly overwhelm them. They just don't have a lot of supply to resist here, and the disruption is rapidly increasing. So that's the situation there. And I've also started putting supply into Darwin. We've been able to sneak, despite the fact that he pushed in and took Port Moresby, we've been sneaking some supply convoys through here. So it doesn't seem like he's got much aviation, if any, at Moresby, because this should be easy for him to close down, but he's not tried. And we've snuck some AKLs through. These guys are on their way back to Sydney. We've got another one unloading about 300 more supply at Darwin. Darwin's up to about 8,000, which is not enough to give enough supply into Catherine's Furnace, or Catherine, and Wyndham and Broome on the northern coast of Australia, where we've got a decent amount of troops here. We got basically a division, a little bit less than a division worth of troops at Darwin in case he lands some troops there. But we've got additional task forces sort of loading up, another 5,800 on the way there, 5,700 here, and we're loading some additional supplies here. So we're trying to sneak some low-value task forces in if he's willing to do that. We also have the 2nd Marine Regiment in the process of unloading at Melbourne. So we've got the Americal Division, which got its nickname from being deployed to New Caledonia. But then we've also got the 2nd Marines unloading at Melbourne. Our plan is to get the entire element of the 2nd Marine Division. So this is the 2nd Marine Regiment. But the plan is to get the entire 2nd Marine Division to Melbourne. They are actually all on the way, with the exception of the 8th Marines, which are at Savi. And the 8th Marines will begin loading up at Savi here this turn. So we're going to start loading the 8th Marines into... We're going to do it in a couple of small task forces. The dockyards at Savi are too small for us to load the whole division at once among a big transport task force. You can see we only have 6,000 tons of shipping able to dock at Savi at any one time. So we've got to take it's going to take 3 or 4 transports to load independently, and then we'll move that 8th Marine Regiment over to Melbourne. And when they all get there, we will form the 2nd Marines into one division and perhaps have them plan for Nomaya as well. So, with that being said, Japanese air power is an MIA. It's just deployed in the wrong place. So, they don't, Japan does not have enough torpedo bombers to cover everywhere. And so we know they've got twin-engine bombers at Palembang because they've been bombing Coast. But Palembang is too far south to effectively cover Meen, especially with a night bombardment. So remember, these cruisers came in. It was at night. They attacked the task force at Melbourne, destroyed them. They bombarded Melbourne at night, destroyed that, and did that. And then they pulled out and got all the way back to Great Nicobar before the end of the turn. So they were probably somewhere around here when the sun came up. And so they were, I don't know, 18 hexes away from Palembang. So if he had these guys set to naval attack, they couldn't hit them with torpedoes anyway. They were too far out of range. And apparently Singapore either wasn't stood up, wasn't ready, or they didn't they didn't have enough recon. I'm not entirely sure, but in any event, they got out of there before they were able to, to close the gap. Now, I would expect that to change, and that's why we're having our cruisers and destroyers pull out of Great Nicobar back to Sri Lanka. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's episode of War in the Pacific, Admirals Edition. I hope you guys enjoy this series and this episode. Please leave your thoughts down below, as well as your thoughts on this somewhat important turn with this naval engagement. And until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.